Path of Exile 2 has everybody hyped, myself included, for the December 6th release of the beta. Now, I've been very fortunate in that I've gotten a few opportunities to play it over the last year. I've played the Witch, I've played the Ranger, I have played the Mercenary, I've played the Monk. I can't wait to dive in and play the beta. That said, at all of the preview opportunities, I had the chance to sit down with Jonathan Rogers, the game director, and ask him a few questions. Now, I've never released these interviews before, but I thought I would do so right now to get some thoughts from him about Path of Exile, about the games industry, and what he thinks.
What are you doing over there that's keeping people into Path for over 10 years and excited about Path 2? What do you focus on to keep that going?
I really think that it's being unafraid of innovation. I think a lot of game companies, and especially as they get larger, they start to get very sort of dried in the wool, and it even happens within the studio. Like quite frequently, I propose a change and I get a lot of pushback from people because, oh, this is the way we've always done it, you know, that kind of thing. And just even from that, like, I don't think it's even necessary, like, you know, because people talk all the time about how, oh, you know, budgets get large and people get risk averse. I don't even think that's necessarily even the largest pressure. I think that what it is that even internal to the studio, you know, a lot of people get used to how things are. They want things to stay the same. Like many people who work for a game company are fans of the game. And so you get that same pressure of like, oh, you know, we can't change our flasks work. We can't change this. We can't change that. You know what I mean? And so we just have to really try to push through that. And so a lot of the time in the studio, what I'm doing is I'm saying to people, you know what? Like, even if you don't like this, we're going to try it. And if it's bad, then it's bad and we'll just do something else. But if, you know, it's worth trying to do different things. And I think that served us well. And every time we've taken risks, it's paid off, right? And every time that we've been risk averse, I think it hasn't gone as well for us.
Why do you sort of stand out right now in the industry? I think about how you handled a recent difficult decision, I have to imagine, to delay the beta from November to December. Well, let me rephrase the question here.
Mm-hmm.
How did you decide to handle the delay in that manner?
Well, first of all, delaying a game is very, very difficult because there are so many people who want to tell you that it can't be done. And the reason they want to say that is because they're like, oh, you know, we're going to have to lose this deposit on this marketing thing, and we're going to have these server costs, and we're going to have this and that, right? So it ends up costing a lot of money. So it's a very difficult decision to make. And plus, there's also just disappointing the players, and everyone's afraid of that, and that's really hard. But at the same time, we just kind of got to the point where it was untenable not to delay because the risks were starting to get too high. But I think the really most important thing is just being honest with people, not appearing, you know, like, for lack of a better word, like a corporate drone, right? Like, you want to actually just be honest and tell people exactly, you know, why did we come to this decision? What actually happened there? And I think that, you know, like every time we've ever been honest with the players, I think that that's been something that's been really good. So, you know, that's where it comes from, really. Like, we just told people exactly why it was. We didn't kind of mince words or kind of, you know, like trying to be vague. Like, you know, here is the exact thing that caused us to delay the game. We'll tell the players that, and they'll hopefully be understanding of that.
Yeah, totally get it. And I think it's received really well. I watched a different announcement from a different company, and it was all over the place. And then I watched yours, very succinct. You take responsibility, you apologize, and then you put it out there. And I as a player, really appreciated that because I am looking forward to the November date. What's the biggest issue facing the overall industry right now, in your opinion?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I mean, it's interesting because I think AAA gaming is in a weird place right now. Like, we're kind of in this weird, like maybe this is not the right, sort of AA territory where it's like we're in this kind of position where like we're not like one of the giant mega studios, so that we kind of haven't inflated to the point where it becomes difficult to even make anything. But we're also definitely not in the classification of what you would call an indie game either. So I think that's kind of interesting because there's just not a lot of huge things in that area. And really, I mean, that stuff we talked about the ossification of game development, like in AAA, it's just really, really bad at this point, right? Like, there's definitely very little risk taking. There's kind of not a lot of that going on. But at the same time, you know, there aren't a lot of those kind of indies coming up and sort of entering the big leagues either. And so it's just something that's kind of been a trend for quite a while. You've kind of got the small games and you've got the big games. There's very little in the middle. So I think Path of Exile really is kind of in that sort of space. They're one of the few games that kind of is in that type of area.
Like right in the middle.
Yeah, exactly, right? You know, so we get to have like kind of nice graphics and a nice budget and all that sort of stuff, but we also get to still be innovative and like do interesting things that other companies aren't doing. So I really don't know how to sort of reclaim that middle again and sort of have the game industry have that kind of stuff again. And I think that really is challenging for the industry. Like, it used to be that there were a lot of what you might call AA games, and I kind of don't know where it all went. Like, why do we now in this position section where you've got the like ultra AAA stuff, which is kind of very stolid and kind of not really going anywhere. And then on the other end of the side of things, you've got like the indies where, you know, it can be hard to get the broader audiences. And, you know, like I just don't know how you get that middle back.
Do you feel like there's been an over-prioritization put on graphics?
Well, you know, that's an interesting one. I think graphics are important. They actually set, like, there is definitely evidence that people appreciate a game more when graphics are a thing, but at the same time, like, you can do that stuff more efficiently if you're clever. And I understand it sort of may look like, you know, part of the reason why AAA budgets have inflated so much is because, you know, of what they're doing with graphics. But at the same time, I do think that a lot of what they're doing, like you can do good-looking graphics by taking advantage of modern hardware without tying yourself into a process that leads to like a very expensive development process that I think some studios have. Like we're able to produce a game with 100 bosses and like 800 monsters without having to, you know, fall into the trap of having to have a team that's like absolutely thousands and thousands in size. Like it can be done. It's just a question of you know, correct prioritization and the way that you do it. So I think it can be done. And as I said, players do value graphics. Like it's important. Like when people are looking at impressive boss fights, part of what they're looking at is the good animation and all the sort of work that we put into that. It's part of the spectacle and the charm. So, you know, like a lot of people do say graphics aren't important. I actually don't agree. I think they are important, but then it's the same time you have to be very careful not to waste time doing things, you know, like sanding under the drawers is what they would, Pixar, I think, used to say. You know, when you don't need to be doing that, you know, when you can be concentrating on the stuff that's actually, you know, put the budget on the screen, as it were, as opposed to wasting a lot of time with things that people just don't really notice.
Do you think Path of Exile 2 is going to be able to dethrone Banana Game on Steam charts?
That's a tricky question. I think that when we go into full release, I think that there's a very good chance that we could end up topping the charts. But you know, for early access, I'm not so sure. I guess we're going to see. I really have no idea what kind of concurrency we're going to get for early access. Like on the one hand, you know, like it is a big. I think it's going to be a big, you know, tentpole release. On the other hand, you know, it is early access, right? Like a lot of people might be afraid to jump in for that reason. But I guess the message to those people would be that, you know, we are a game that has the content of what a full AAA game would have these days, and we're also a much lower price point than what those games would be. So even though, you know, it's early access, I think that the value proposition is incredibly there, and I think we should be able to see some pretty big numbers on launch of early access as well. But certainly when we get to full release, I'm sure we're going to be topping the charts. I see no reason why we wouldn't be.
Confident, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
Oh, well, we're certainly going to buy enough servers for that.
Right. When you're making a game, what's the most important consideration a developer needs to have when crafting the experience? What needs to be top of the priority list?
It's honestly a very difficult question because of the fact that a good game, is the culmination of getting every little tiny detail right. And it really is that defeat in detail, I think, that makes games feel bad. And the amount of effort, it honestly takes a lot of experience to get to the point where people even know what good looks like. I think that, once again, a lot of AAA games these days are getting defeated in detail, right? Like it's all of the little things that add together to an experience that, that isn't good, rather than it being just like one big issue. And I guess a lot of people, when they're analyzing games and why they're not doing well, they want to focus on, oh, it's because of this thing, and you know, this big issue, it's because of that big issue. But I really think that gameplay comes down to getting 1,000 small details right. And if you do that, then the experience will be good. And it's honestly, like, I think even we underestimated what it would take to ship Path of Exile 2, because like just getting all those details right and, you know, like getting all those things, like it was very easy to be overconfident, especially at first when we were marketing the game. Because making a fresh game means getting all those details right again. And, you know, getting all the, like, we were really overconfident about itemization. Like, it took a lot of iteration to get to the point where that was working. Like, we thought, oh, yeah, you know, we'll just take PoE 1, make a few changes, and then we're good. No, like, it required, like, a huge amount of extra work, you know, like, all of those things. And, like, you get one thing wrong, and immediately someone will have a bad experience, and they'll say that your game is bad. So it really is all those details that are required to get it done. So, yeah, I honestly couldn't point to one thing. It's just, like, 1,000 things, but correct, and knowing what those are.
Yeah, I remember the old philosophy. I think it was Bungie who said it, like the 3 seconds of fun or something like that.
Sure.
Is that still one of the main things that you
Well, I mean, sure, it's absolutely relevant, right? Like, you need to make sure that at every moment you are enjoying the experience that you're having. And, you know, and as I said, any one thing can destroy that. So you need to be very careful. I mean, in some ways you could say that game development is more about not getting things wrong than it is about getting things right. Like if you can polish absolutely every little problem that a player might have out of an experience, you can give them a good time, even though, you know, like obviously you need innovation as well, but like it really is important just to not get any of that stuff wrong.
What makes you so confident that Path of Exile 2 has all those right things?
I guess we've done a lot of testing recently, and it was something that took us a while to get to and do all that stuff. But effectively, we've beta tested a lot. We've done a lot of these events like that. We've got a lot of feedback. It's helped a lot to get a lot more confidence. And I guess one of the things that also was a bit concerning when we first were doing all that testing is that we were finding that Path of Exile 1 players were not liking the game as much as new players were. So by having, by iterating more, by making it so those numbers became similar, it makes me actually a lot more confident, because I know that someone who knows Path of Exile, who knows how all the mechanics should work, is liking the game. And I also know that a new player who takes it on face value is who also doesn't have any experience with, who doesn't appreciate the game on the level of just like knowing about all the stats and everything, can also enjoy the game as well. And that makes me feel we've got both the kind of immediate, the few seconds of playing is just enjoyable, sort of going well, and we've also got the kind of longer term, I'm caring about stats and how to build my character stuff right as well. And if we can get both of those things right, then I think we'll have a good game in our hands.
Yeah, I mean, I already told you during Summer Games Fest that I was really enjoying it, so
right.
Best of luck as we go towards December. I'm
Absolutely.
very excited.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Path 2 is coming out. What are some of the pitfalls that you want to avoid with Path of Exile 2? And at the same time, what were some of your must-haves when developing a sequel to an already hit game?
Yeah, so I mean, the tricky part is that when you make a game, a sequel to a very popular game that has a very hardcore community, every single thing you change about it is like a potential point of friction for a community that's going to be like can be incredibly. Look, they've got a lot of opinions, right? And so the pitfall that I worry about is, like on day one, you get a bunch of even though. New players may play it and enjoy it. You might have a situation where like PoE1 players are kind of like, I don't like this, it doesn't fit to whatever I want. And so that is a really big problem. And we were actually very concerned about this because when we first did our user testing closed betas, we actually found that Path of Exile 1 players rated the game worse than what Path of Exile 2 players, new players did. And that was a huge concern, right? Because it's like, well, we can't really launch like this. This would be a big issue. And so it took us a while to kind of get the game to a point where both PoE1 and new players both liked it. But yeah, we started from a point where new players liked it more than old players. And in fact, it was very interesting because Path of Exile 1 players actually rated the difficulty of the game harder than what new players did. New players rated the game as, it's actually not that difficult. And PoE1 players were like, man, this game is so impossible. And it's just because they're trying to apply all the knowledge that they had from playing a game for 10 years to a game that has different mechanics and different stuff going on. So as I said, I think that's the biggest pitfall and the biggest potential source of strife that we might get at launch is just, a bunch of PoE1 players having issues. But as I said, I think we've managed to solve those problems. There was just a lot of things around itemization and like the way the tree was, and just a lot of things like that we had to deal with. And so in terms of the stuff that I think that was just really important to get going from the start, this Endgame stuff, I think that was something that we realized relatively late, that we really have to make sure that if we don't have a good Endgame going into early access, then Path of Exile 1 players are just going to say, hey, this is just a worse game. We need that stuff to be able to actually make a PoE1 player feel like, oh yeah, you know what, this is a true sequel to PoE1, because for a lot of players in PoE1, the campaign is not even a thing for them anymore. They complete it in hours because they've done it so many times. For them, it's like just a tiny blip in the progress of a character, right? Because they spend 99% of their time in endgame. So if we didn't have that, then I think it would have been a disaster. Thankfully, now that we've addressed that concern, we've got stuff, we believe we have enough of an endgame to make those people happy. I think that pitfall will thankfully be avoided. But as I said, it was only a thing that we realized relatively recently.
What was the hardest thing to get with couch co-op? Because that's not something a lot of games do these days.
For sure. So, there's a few things. One of them is that, and this is probably the most obvious one to people, is that having to just build the UI again. We have to make 3 versions of the UI now. We've got the PC version, we've got the console version, then we've got the couch co-op version. But it ended up being really important because we found that it really just sucked to have to wait for the other player to do things. Like when we first did it, it was just, you could open a full screen menu and the other person just had to wait, basically. And so then we were like, okay, well, this isn't really good enough. Let's add at least inventory story, we'll make it so that part will work. And then as soon as we had that, we're like, oh, but people want to be able to allocate passives separately, people want to be able to do this and that, and pretty soon we were rebuilding every single UI screen. And we haven't even finished that yet. Like right now, if you've got two players, you can't both shop at the same time, but we're still getting complaints about that. So now we're like, okay, now if we make the shop interface as well in Couch Co-op, and we're pretty much ending up, as I said, rebuilding everything 3 times now. So that's certainly certainly something. But I think it is worth it because people are so excited for Couch Co-op. Like even just around the office, like once our developers knew we were making Couch Co-op, everyone was like, oh man, I really want to play this with my partner. Like it was just a really exciting thing. People have responded really well to it. Like ever since the announcement, people have just been really buzzing about it. So I think it's worth it.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's just a feature you don't see a lot these days.
For sure.
So the fact that it's being included, it kind of like just reminds you that you're putting a lot of care into Path 2. Path 2 is going to have PvP, right?
It will, but it's not really the focus, to be honest. So every time we've ever tried to make PvP like a big focus thing, people have kind of found like they enjoy PvE better. So like we'll have PvP still in, but it's more of a kind of fun thing you might want to do with your friends rather than some big serious competitive thing. Like we're not an esport. That is not our intention. So that's kind of.
Do you have any concerns about balancing going in?
For PvP?
For PvE?
Oh, for PvE? Yeah. Absolutely, right. I mean, Path of Exile is an atrocious game to balance. It's especially hard now because the amount of cross-class synergy that can happen, because we're doing a lot more of this sort of combo-type gameplay, and when we do that, we try to keyword things so that they would work across classes. So, for example, you've got something like a power charge, which is something that you can use to improve your abilities. And we try to have power charge mechanics on quite a lot of different classes. And what that means is that we've got to be very careful about what skills, because you can use skills from other classes. You've got to be very careful about how those things can happen, because like when you're balancing something, when you're looking at it, you may just be only thinking, okay, what can this do with the skills that I've got in this class? But given that you can use things from any class, we also have to be worried about all this other stuff, and it can kind of the explosion of different possibilities kind of gets out of control. And I know already that there's just like ultra broken stuff that you could do. Like if you use that bell with the Sork using Spark, it is broken as hell. Like you can just chew through any boss right now. So we need to do something about that. But that kind of thing is certainly tough to deal with. But we kind of like that stuff because that's what makes it interesting in the long term, right?
What's your philosophy in that? Like I've heard it referred to as like nails on a board. You see one pop up a little too high. Do you just let it linger for a while before you tap it down where it needs to be?
So generally speaking, we don't do nerfs within a league. Like whatever the balance is when a season starts, we want to keep that so that people don't feel like they invest time into their character and then for the developers to come along and destroy what they were doing. So I always try to avoid that. But each season, it is okay to be able to do some balance stuff. I don't want to just like whenever we're doing stuff like that, I try to find something that isn't what the players expect as for how we're going to change something. Like, I don't want to just, like, nerf the damage value, right? I mean, sure, you can do that, but it's cooler, I think, to kind of come up with something else to kind of subvert something that's going on and sort of make it more interesting. I guess the funny part about that is, and I think the reason why a lot of developers just kind of turn into nerf fests with their patches is because it's way easier to see the thing that's broken and nerf it than it is to see the thing that's underpowered and buff it. Because it's just like, you don't really, like inherently the things that are not as powerful get less attention because players aren't playing with them, so they're not on your mind. And so the ability to sort of notice that stuff and buff it is actually quite hard to sort of get into the mindset of doing. But it is what you should be doing.
Yeah, and there's this sort of dance with players where you want them to feel that power fantasy of leveling. For sure. But then you also got to keep it fresh, like with each season of the game. How do you approach that? Like, are you like, okay, this time we're going to really go all in on druids, and then next season it'll be witch?
It does kind of end up going like that. Like, with each Path of Exile season, we definitely pick a few things to address, but you've always got to make sure that there's a stuff around the whole game. And so ideally, with the way we do game design, whenever we add something new to the system, because everything has so much cross-pollination, it means that it generally will affect the builds of kind of all different classes, like, when we add a league and so on. So that does keep the gameplay fresh. I think more so than most games, we have this kind of like thing where, you know, almost any system can interact with another system, and that is what leads to the complexity that like Path of Exile is kind of a bit notorious for. But it does mean that you know, it does keep the game fresh every time people keep coming back. So ideally, we can kind of tame the complexity while still keeping that element. But it is pretty challenging.
What's something that you're really proud of with Necropolis, and something that you feel like you could have been better? The feedback has been somewhat mixed. For
so it isn't really my thing. Like, I'm not working on Path of Exile 1, so I'm kind of aware of it just from being in the studio. But probably the main issue that we had with Necropolis, I think, was that we had a lot of like brokenness in the economy specifically. Like, there were things that certain players were able to do to get like ridiculous amounts of wealth really easily, and that kind of broke the economy a little bit in that league more so than others. The funny thing about it was that at the start, people thought that we'd nerfed everything into the ground to the point there would be no like oh, you've nerfed all these things, there's no way to get like good items anymore. And then pretty soon we started getting all of these different economic exploits popping up that led to some pretty crazy stuff. And I think that led to some sort of issues. I mean, that's kind of the main one from my perspective, because it's kind of what we've been dealing with as a studio. There were just a lot of these kinds of exploits early on in the league, more so than usual, and so that's been kind of a bit annoying. And so yeah, it is really hard, and I think one of the things we sort of learned about that is that we really need to be doing more extreme testing. So like with each mechanic, really thinking like, okay, what is the most broken possible thing you could do with this, and really concentrating on that, because otherwise it can lead to these kinds of problems. And I think our QA just kind of weren't really thinking about it in that way as much. Like, they tended to look at things and be like, okay, does this feel balanced in the context of like the other stuff you're using it with, without really thinking as much about like what is the worst possible case for this and really zeroing in on that. So yeah, we had a lot of issues around that, and I think that's part of what sort of happened with Necropolis.
With Path 2, what's like your favorite quality of life thing that you're introducing with, like you've announced couch co-op, cross progression is huge in my mind. But what's something that you're really happy with? To
me, the best QOL stuff is just the way the new skill gem system works. It's just so much easier. And also now, I mean, this is just what we're doing at the moment, but like now that we've got the support gem system working how it is, it's just so much easier to deal with, and like, you know, it makes it way more obvious. We've got, I don't know if the build that you've got has all of the stuff here, but like seeing the changes that happen to your character as you add each thing, like that stuff is really nice. It just makes building so much easier. So I mean, you know, there's like a million things I could say, but like that's kind of what I'm thinking about at the moment, is just all that stuff with skills and supports and how much easier that makes the game.
Story-wise for Path 2, have you put more focus into it, knowing that like you're going to have more people playing together?
For sure. I don't know if you noticed the changes that were even made in the build. You probably didn't play quite far enough to really understand that, but we're doing a lot more with that stuff. I think we're doing a lot better job than PoE 1 did, and I do hope that by the time people get through Path of Exile 2, they will at least know what the story was, which was not the case for a lot of Path of Exile 1 players. Yeah, we can definitely do better there. But there's also even other things, like we've changed the dialogue system quite a bit from how it was in PoE 1. There's still more changes coming even for that. It is something that I want people to be able to consider good in the game, which I think that PoE 1, I think, had pretty good sort of environmental stuff going on, but I wouldn't say that like the overall narrative was like a lot of people skipped it. They weren't really interested, and I think that we can definitely do better there.
What's the greatest lesson you learned from playing other people's games?
I guess it's very different depending on the type of game, but I guess one of the things that I mostly focus on is the fact that like whenever new games come out, you really need to be cognizant of the new minimum bar that they're setting. Like, even if you're not necessarily going to, you don't want to copy what they're doing necessarily, but I think you've got to look at it as like, what is the thing that, what new standard has this game set? You know, we now have to meet this, you know? So like for something like so we've got a dodge roll, obviously, and an animation cancelling. That is not a thing that you could get away without, I think, launching an action RPG today. I think it just wouldn't work. It is set, there is a minimum standard there for that kind of level of controllability. You need to meet it. And the same is true of many other systems, like trade and, you know, the way item system work and a bunch of other things like that. Like, you have to make sure you're learning that from other games. So, it's just about making sure you're meeting that new minimum, because the minimum is raising all the time, right? With every game that comes out, there's something new that players will expect, and they're right to do so, right?
Just more generally, what's your favorite game of all time and why?
Oh, geez. I mean, that's always a hard one. I mean, if I really had to, if you're putting me on the spot, it's the first thing that comes to mind is Half-Life. Because, like, you know, I mean, it's the stuff you play when you're a kid, right? That it's like, this is the greatest game ever, you know what I mean? Like, it was when I was a kid, it was, you know, my favorite games were Final Fantasy VII, and Half-Life and StarCraft, right? Like, these are my these are like the three sort of pillars of my youth of gaming, right? And so it's very hard to look past that when, you know, nothing else compares to that first experience you have with those kinds of things. Half-Life might be one of the one of the more probably slightly up there above the other ones. You might expect me to say Diablo, which obviously was a big deal, but like honestly, when I was a kid, it was those other ones.
Yeah, when I was a kid, and I know we're wrapping up here, but I got the Brood War chest, and that was like my first experience with PC gaming. It was great.
Nice.
Okay, just real quick on this last interview. This was one of the earliest interviews I did, and my microphone was not working during it, so I did audio pickups, which may sound a little bit disjointed, but I'm basically repeating what I asked at the time. Here you go. What's the most important thing for an ARPG to get right?
I don't know that I can answer just one thing, because really I'd say there's 5 major things. So the number one to me is action combat, right? Like you can't have like an MMO style combat. It needs to be action focused. Another one is random item generation. The random items are super important. You need to get that right. Very few games actually do. The next one is random levels. Ultra important, because if you want a game to last for a long period of time, you have to have level randomization. Once again, something that a lot of modern games aren't really doing these days. Another one is secure online economy. So effectively, you have to have a secure item system. If you don't have the ability to trade items between players, then people just won't value them the same way as if they find them themselves. And then the last one, what is my 5th pillar? What have I forgotten here? Oh yeah, that's right. Character customization. You have to have the ability to have a large amount of character customization, so that if you're playing the game over and over again, you're going to have a lot of different ways to play. It's going to be a different experience every time. So to me, those are the 5. That's how you make an action RPG right there. We've said this at GDC talks before, and yet still action RPGs come out and they don't have one of those. And I'm kind of like, we've given you the secret sauce, guys. Like, that's how you do it. So yeah, to me, that's an action RPG right there.
Is it inspiring to see so many successful ARPGs on the market right now?
I think it is good, because a rising tide lifts all boats, and especially with the kind of seasonal model that action RPGs do best with, there's room for people to play more than one action RPG at a time. But the big thing to me that I found is that when new games come out like that, they kind of set a new minimum standard, and we have to make sure we're meeting that standard. Like if they have features that players now expect, that means that we have to make sure we're adapting to what that new minimum is. So that makes it challenging, right? Like there are things we could have gotten away with before Last Epoch comes out, and then Last Epoch comes out, they have a few things going on that have once again raised a minimum standard. We now have to meet that standard as well. We have to care about that. So that kind of thing, it matters a lot, and as I said, we have to pay attention.
Can you give me an example of something someone else is doing that you really like?
Right. So a really good example of this is the trade stuff they have in Last Epoch, where that isn't to say that we want to copy what they're doing with trade. But the key thing is that there was clearly a community demand to make trade easier than what it is in PoE 1. And when there isn't another game that's meeting that demand, we can honestly get away with a worse experience. But when there is, it's like, well, we have to do something about this, right? We have to make sure that we have a trade system that's going to, allow that to meet the new minimum standard. Otherwise, people are just going to be complaining about it, and they're right to, right? Because once other games in the genre have lifted the standard, that's on us to improve.
When watching streams, do you ever see things you want to address or fix?
Absolutely. I mean, the only way that we're going to improve is doing that stuff. And it's honestly just watching the people who are playing here, the number of issues they ran into it and being like, oh, God damn it. Like we really should have done something about that. It's painful, but you have to do it. Like the user testing, seeing what people actually do is super important.
Does Path of Exile 2 feel vastly different from Path of Exile?
Well, I would definitely say so. To me, just the way combat feels is just vastly different than before. And like that's kind of what I just really want that nobody, like, if you go to forums about like when we release a new Path of Exile 1 expansion, one of the top comments outside of our community is always, oh, I tried that game, but I just thought it felt really bad or really old or something like that. I just want to make sure that no one ever again says that our combat isn't best in class. Like I want to make sure that we don't have that criticism anymore. I just don't want to see it again. And so, that's why I'm really motivated to make sure that we're fixing those problems. And I think we can still even do more than what we've even done now.
Can you tell us more about why you delayed the beta?
Yeah, so ultimately it just comes down to the fact that we didn't appreciate the degree to which really nailing, like the amount of polish you need to do on something to really make it perfect. We're still going to get all the content that we said we were going to like. The content we said we were going to have, like that will be ready. There'll be a whole game there. It's just that like the level of polish. So when we actually went and we're like, okay, we're preparing for this demo here, and we're going to get Act 1 and 2 flawless. We're going to get it perfect. The amount of work that took to get it to the point where even we still have bugs now. But I mean, to get to the point where we were like, yeah, we've got something here, just took longer than we expected. Like the level of polish that we, I guess, demand of ourselves at this point is just higher than it is in PoE1. Like a PoE1 boss does not get, I guess, does not need this level of attention. It's kind of shocking, honestly, how much more work it is to get a boss from feeling like, okay, it's got all its skills, to getting to the point where it's like, okay, now it's actually really solid and fun to play. And like, it's just like so many subtle details of AI, how AI works and so on, and all this sort of stuff. And then the other side of that is player skills, where once again, getting them to actually feel really, really good is just a longer experience than we thought. And then in addition to that, we have what I was talking about before, which is that when we go and change player skills, sometimes the result of that is like we have to go through every monster and boss again and change the AI and abilities and all that sort of stuff now to take into account for that. So when we added active block, it's like, well, suddenly you need to have a way to know that a skill is going to be not active blockable. So that means we have to think, okay, we have to make, not only do we have to rethink like every skill of like, okay, does this fight have enough abilities that that a person who's active blocking is able to worry about? Like, is the mix of that correct for this character class? Do we have the indicators that we need? Do we have the wind-ups? And all that stuff suddenly comes in. So it's like you change a core feature like that on the player class and all the content needs to change again. And that once again, that sort of rippled out a huge amount. So I'm hoping there's not going to be too much more of that. I'm hoping we've got to the point now where it's like, we don't suddenly need to feel like we need to change the entire game again just for another character ability. But on the other hand, we just showed you a mount. And I don't know if we've fully explored the results of that one either yet, so we'll see.
I'm sure it'll break some.
Yes, probably.
What do people buy most in the store?
So armor sets are big, like something just to look cool that way. But recently we've been trying a lot more. I mean, stash tabs is a thing, which is one of those things that's kind of on the borderline, but is a reasonable amount. But then the other one, recently we've been doing a lot more things that involve, like, they trigger off gameplay, but they don't actually change the gameplay in any way. So what's a random example of that? Just a random thing like, okay, when you do a critical strike, you get like this extra effect. When you kill a rare, you get like a big hand that comes down from the heavens and slams down and this kind of stuff. Like, it's stuff that kind of like interacts with gameplay. And I think that for a long time, our microtransactions were entirely visual and they didn't really have those interesting kind of interaction with the gameplay, which was a mistake. And the big change we made was we started getting our game designers to make the microtransactions rather than having a separate team to make microtransactions. We're like, no, the microtransactions actually need game designers to work on them, and that made them significantly better. So that kind of stuff has helped a lot. And so that sort of broadened quite a bit the horizons of what is interesting. So anything that's kind of cool that just happens during gameplay, I think that players really like that kind of stuff.
What's your philosophy on microtransactions? Have you seen them handled poorly?
I mean, the main thing really, as you said, is the pay-to-win stuff. And like it may seem obvious, but the ultimate downside of anything that you sell is that you are incentivized as a developer to not make that thing good for free, if you know what I mean. And so you could argue that by selling cosmetics, that we're not incentivized to make our non-cosmetic items look as cool. But I mean, I think that's we do try anyway, of course, but at the same time, like, that's a thing that you have to worry about. And I think a lot of games, they may go into things where the philosophy is, oh, we can sell this thing and it's not going to be a problem. But then there's this just sort of subtle effect that it has on all your game design where it just infects things and kind of just like influences how the game is to play. So the moment that monetization touches it, it's kind of like it gets a bit corrupted by it. So that's really it. I don't know if I have any like exact specifics on a specific game to really call out and shame here, but that's kind of the main thing. So like even when you look at because I guess I'm like this, I'll just talk about PoE and like the fact that we sell stash tabs. So the original reason why we were like, that's fine, is because if we didn't sell stash tabs, what people would do is create more free accounts, because you can just create as many accounts as you want in a free-to-play game. You could just effectively create more accounts and have more stash anyway in a more inconvenient manner. So then we're like, okay, well, like people are going to do this anyway, so therefore the selling of that isn't going to be an issue. And it isn't for the most part an issue, I think. But at the same time, you'll see a game designer and they'll say something like, oh, like it's fine if this thing doesn't stack too bad. It'll just, they'll just put it in the stash and that'll sell more stash tabs. And I'm like, no, we need to really, like, even just that is immediately making a thing. Like, someone is saying this because of the business model. They should never be doing that. Like, we want to keep the game designers away from that thinking as much as possible. And so anytime I see that, I'm kind of like, no, we really have to not fall down into that hole. But even just for something as simple as what we do have, that's already like, I've heard people say something like that, and I'm like, no, we can't do this. We have to make sure that we're not. So yeah, as I said, it's a very easy hole to fall into, and we try as much as possible never to fall into that. And the best way we can do that is by not introducing any pay-to-win elements as much as we can.
Why has Path of Exile stood the test of time? It's more popular than ever right now.
We've been pretty much consistently increasing in player base since we did our league model, the sort of 3-month cycle and so on. But I think ultimately the important reason is because we do those 5 things, and very few games do. I can name on very few titles that actually do all of that right, and then actually follow up by having the seasonal releases. Other games that don't, like, for example, so Last Epoch doesn't have random areas, at least not like in the way that Path of Exile does. And I think that if they don't do something about that, that could be something that is going to hurt them, because I think that kind of thing will be to their detriment in the long run. And like, once again, it's just one of those things that, like, when we were looking at, like, these pillars actually go right back to the very founding of our studio. Like, when we founded our studio, we're like, these are the 5 things you need to have a long-lasting game. And if you look at Diablo 2, which also had all of these things, Diablo 2, which of course we were very highly influenced by when we started our studio, is also one of the longest lasting games. Like, that game was being sold in stores. Obviously, this is back when people actually went into stores and bought games. This was still being sold in stores like 10 years after it came out. There is like no other game I can think of that has that kind of long-term run in retail. It's absolutely crazy. So it really shows you that those 5 pillars really do get you a long-lasting game.
How much Path of Exile versus Path of Exile 2 have you been playing?
So at this point, I have to admit, I don't play much Path of Exile 1. I actually find it very hard to go back to, because the combat is just so much worse than PoE 2 from my experience that I just can't really do it anymore. But PoE 2 I play every night. You have to, right? Like, every night I spend my evening playing the game. My son, thankfully, really enjoys watching me do it. It's just because I need to see the kind of changes, and because every time you play a boss, every time you play the thing, you just learn a little bit more and a little bit more, and you just have to keep on iterating on it. So yeah, I pretty much have to play constantly. But I mean, I enjoy it, right? Like, it is fun to do, and it's especially great seeing all of the art and everything that gets added, and like all the new things that come in. Like, it's actually great. And like, every time I see a new thing, I'm like, oh yeah, that's so cool. Like, those little elements. So that's really fun. But I have to admit, I don't play PoE 1 anymore. And the person who does is Mark, and he is therefore much more involved in Path of Exile 1. But at this point, as I said, it's hard to go back to.
What's a non-ARPG that you've played and really liked?
I mean, other than Balatro? Yeah. Okay, what was the most recent thing? Oh, so the most recent one I was playing was Prince of Persia, that new Prince of Persia game that came out. Can't remember the subtitle of it. The Other Lost Crown, yeah. So that one's pretty interesting to me. I think that there's a lot of really interesting combat design in that game, and I was paying attention to it quite a lot. Even though, as I said, totally different genre, but I think that there's a lot to learn from these kinds of action games, and looking at some of the sequences and some of the ways things combine and so on. That game's obviously got a lot of like aerial type hitting stuff, which is not applicable to us at all, but it's very interesting to look at something like that. And also, when you look at the bosses in a game like that, it's there's just sort of interesting inspiration you can take. So that's probably the most recent one that I played that I was really kind of like thought was really good. But it is honestly hard to find AAA games these days that have the kind of good qualities that I'm looking for in a game. So that was a nice one.
A huge thank you to Jonathan Rogers and everybody at Grinding Gear Games for letting us play the game, letting me get a chance to sit down with Jonathan to talk a little bit about Grinding Gear Games and Path of Exile 2. If you want to play Path of Exile, you can get access on December 6th if you are a supporter. If you spent over, I believe it was $480 in the original Path of Exile, you get instant access. And if you pay $30, you can just get into early access. Otherwise, when the game fully launches, it's completely free. So check it out. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, everybody. For more on Path of Exile, check out my most recent preview about the Mercenary, or the one about the Witch, or the one about the Ranger. And for more on all things gaming, keep it right here at IGN.